Hello, and welcome back to episode 3 of the Two Blondes and a Microphone podcast. I'm Olivia Gilgan, and this is my partner,
Sophie Dowling.
And today, if you couldn't tell by the title and the rubric you're grading this episode on, today we are talking about the Intolerable Acts and the great influence they had on both American culture and the start of the U.S. government.
After rebels in Boston protested the use of taxation without representation by dumping 342 crates of tea into the Boston Harbor as a part of a little event called the Boston Tea Party, the British Parliament created 5 acts that were supposed to punish Boston for their indiscretion against their oppressors or leaders. However, these acts ended up backfiring on Britain and just furthered their rights for a revolution in the colonies.
The British Parliament passed 4 acts in the beginning that aimed to pay back the loss of profit from the tea, as well as deter further protests from groups like the Sons and Daughters of Liberty. These groups were led by wealthy New Englanders that fought for independence. One of these families, the Adams family, not that Adams family, was a wealthy family from Massachusetts that had many members that were integral to the fight against Britain. These included Sam and Abigail Adams, the leaders of the Sons and Daughters of Liberty, and John Adams, a founding father and the second president of the United States. While these 3 people had very different ideas for the revolution and different ways of fighting for their freedom, they each had their own impacts.
Established between May 20th, 1774 and July 2nd, the 4 acts meant to hurt the New England colony were the Administration of Justice Act, Boston Port Act, the Quartering Act of 1774, and the Massachusetts Government Act. The 5th act that had a large effect on the rest of the country and Canada was the Quebec Act. This was established almost a full year after the rest. The Administration of Justice Act let British officials have trials anywhere that often had biased juries when cases were moved to Britain.
When the Boston Port Act was established, it closed the port of Boston and kept supplies like food and finished products from Europe. It also affected the New England region's economy that relied on a lot of shipping and trading in and out of that port. In response, the people of Massachusetts were outraged and called on the Boston Committee of Correspondence and started the first of many trade boycotts against Britain. A few colonies decided to help Boston by sending food and supplies that they were unable to get with the port closed. However, most colonies were fearful of making enemies with Britain and couldn't boycott the country.
Okay. The 3rd act was the Quartering Act of 1774 and let royal governors house British troops anywhere in their colony. Needing to house troops in the colonies, the British Parliament forced colonists to feed and provide for room for soldiers. Due to this, tensions rose and led to events like the Battle of Golden Hill and the Boston Massacre.
Finally, the Massachusetts Government Act was the 2nd act aimed to punish the people of Boston by restructuring their entire government and expanding the powers of the royal governor. This let the king have a lot more control in the government and restricted things like General Assembly and the elections of other public officials.
Okay. And finally, for real this time, the Quebec Act was the final Intolerable Act. After being passed almost a year after the original acts, changing the borders of Quebec and restricting Virginians' expansion into the west, Britain changed the Proclamation of 1763 and restored French civil law in the New World.
The Intolerable Acts angered colonists so much that it single-handedly furthered the fight for independence and resulted in the First Continental Congress. While the First Continental Congress didn't have many effects on the American Revolution, it set a basis and showed colonists that they could unite for independence. It set a precedent for the Second Continental Congress that had major effects on the American culture and created documents essential to the American Revolution.
Today.